And joining me now is the panel. Deepa Shivaram, White House correspondent at NPR. Navin Nayak, president of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. And Rob Bluey, president and executive editor at the Daily Signal. Thank you all so much for joining me. And Deepa, I want to start with you. We just heard that story in Garrett's interview. There's a human side to these layoffs. As more and more stories start to trickle out, do you think that will have an impact on how they're perceived across the country?
I think so, and I think it's so important that the reporting that Garrett is doing, and people who are federal workers have jobs that also serve their communities and their public, right? And when you try to turn the light switch off overnight, there are going to be consequences, and we might not see that immediately. It might be months and potentially years down the line to get the full scope of what it means to cull down the federal workforce this dramatically. But I think there are some immediate impacts that people are seeing right now in their communities. I've seen a lot on social media today about national parks workers getting cut and what that means. IRS workers right ahead of tax season. There are immediate impacts to trying to change something like the federal workforce literally in the span of days and weeks. And it really does cause a lot of chaos and confusion, and especially when it's services that people are dealing with.
And Deepa, I want to get your thoughts on this next point, and Rob, you as well. We put up these numbers earlier. Just over a majority of respondents think that Trump's executive actions have gone too far. You see those numbers right there. It's a Washington Post Ipsos poll. 57% think he's gone too far. What do those numbers mean to you, and are you surprised to see where they're at right now?
It is interesting because I do feel like just in covering this White House in the last couple of weeks, I mean, the amount of executive authority that is being exercised here is something that they're bragging about. One, it came up in the White House briefing today, right, talking about how President Trump has signed more executive orders than Joe Biden, more executive orders than Barack Obama.
And they argue voters chose this.
And they argue that it's a good thing that they're doing. But, like, it is such a stark contrast coming from, covering the Biden administration. Executive powers of the president like this are not meant to be done every day. Like, this is not a way to legislate or run the country. It's, typically meant as, you maybe couldn't get something done, so it's an emergency or something like that. The way that President Trump has used this power just in an extraordinary amount of time, which is very little time, is very stark and very shocking.
Well, Rob, what do you think of this? Just about 2 weeks ago, there was a poll that showed Trump's job approval. The majority of Americans supported what he was doing. So what do you make of those numbers?
Well, even as you look at the poll that came out, you talked about the CNN poll earlier, 75% of the people in that poll said that they expected Trump to do these things that he's doing. I mean, they may not agree with all of it, but they, I think, recognize that he said these types of things on the campaign trail. So they're not necessarily surprised, Gabe, that he's carrying out these things. To your point about the executive orders, I think this is why it's critically important for Congress to follow through and actually legislate on these issues, because the next president could come in and just wipe a lot of these clean.
Well, speaking of Congress, I want to put up some of the comments that some of these Republican lawmakers are saying right now, defending some of these cuts. For example, in Alaska, congressman there is saying it's important for us to think about this as a way to diversify our economic base. In Oregon, Congressman there, Cliff Benz, saying we have to stop spending so much money, and President Trump is doing his best to take action in that regard. What do you make of those answers? Cutting spending is easier to defend, but as we just saw in that interview, it gets tougher to defend when there are real people behind these layoffs. For example, Kansas City is, preparing for potentially thousands of layoffs.
Sure, and I think as a conservative, I am sympathetic and don't like to see anybody lose their job. At the same time, we are running a $2 trillion, trillion with a T, deficit in our federal budget, so you have to look somewhere to make cuts. I think part of the problem is that the reason they're going after probationary employees, it's so difficult to terminate or remove other employees who have been in the federal government for a long time. So yes, would I like to see reforms in the federal workforce? Absolutely. I think members of Congress who have been talking a good game about cutting spending for a long time but have failed to follow through on the actions are now going to have an opportunity with this budget reconciliation bill to actually prove that they are willing to make the cuts necessary.
Navin, do Democrats see an opportunity here, though, talking about these cuts and the human impact of this?
Absolutely. I mean, this is where conservatives and MAGA in particular are really good at campaigning and disastrous at governing. The American people did not vote for stories like Andrew's 1 month into this. And it's not Andrew personally. Remember, he serves veterans. I don't think once in the campaign Donald Trump said, I'm going to make life worse for veterans in this country by cutting services they depend on. But that is what he's doing. Musk and Trump can do this when it's Twitter because, Twitter doesn't work well. Who cares?
And speaking of Musk and those polls, a majority said that putting Musk in a position of prominence is a bad idea. Is he easier to attack for Democrats than President Trump?
I mean, I think they're both going to own what happens here, and every Republican and every congressman is going to own these cuts. Farmers are not getting payments they were promised as a result of contracts. Daycare centers are not opening. People's heating bills are going up because they cut off a program that funds people's heat. In the winter, we are having a cold spell. These are all consequences that Trump, MAGA, Musk own, and I think this is an interesting comparison. The ACA was very unpopular until what? Until Donald Trump attacked it and the Republicans tried to repeal it. Then it was one of the most popular policies in this country. Conservatives spent 40 years attacking government, and now they are dismantling it. And guess what? The American people are going to wake up and go, oh, wait a second. That's what you meant by government? You meant my Medicare? You meant my food stamps? They're going to freak out. And they're going to own it.
Look, Rob, Musk is getting set to take the stage at CPAC any moment now. He is central to the Republican Party here at this point. How would you rate his performance thus far? The criticism is, oh, he wasn't elected, but he, says President Trump says that, he's giving him a broad range of authority, but the buck stops with the president. How is Musk doing right now?
Well, political leaders never want to use the word no. Of course, they want to appease their constituents and the American people. So I think that's why, to your point, it's difficult. And it's why probably somebody like Elon Musk has a unique ability to go in because he's not elected and look and use his skills as somebody who's led successful companies to help the president make these choices. He is incredibly popular with conservatives right now. I think they appreciate what he's done at X, giving them a platform of free speech where they can openly communicate their ideas. And having been at CPAC earlier today, I can tell you that crowd will embrace him enthusiastically.
Unelected person, though, just to emphasize.
Carrying out the wishes of the president.
Unelected.
Well, speaking of one elected person, Deepa, I want to get your thoughts really quickly on major development today. Mitch McConnell saying he's not running for re-election. What do you make of that and his legacy here in the Senate?
Look, a long career in the Senate has seen so many presidents come through a lot of different agendas and has certainly shaped, I think, the Republican Senate and their priorities and what that has looked like for years and years and years now. His health concerns the last couple months, years, it's been very top of mind. If you Google Mitch McConnell recently, that's a lot of things that are likely to come up. But, to me, I'm kind of thinking about it in a way of like, what is Mitch McConnell's Republican Party and the Republican Party that was the majority of his career versus the Republican Party that exists now. And if he's gone in the Senate, really how much of a difference does that make given where we are politically?
Speaking of that, I want to play something quickly Josh Hawley said today about the Senate's budget plan and get your reaction on the other side. Let's listen.
Trump wants us to move forward with it, then I will support it. If he doesn't, then I won't. So I'm going to be with him on it. I'll take his direction. If he doesn't support it, there's not a lot of point in it. If he supports the Senate moving forward, then that's fine. It's his agenda, so I'll support it. But if not, then it doesn't seem to me like it's an exercise that has a lot of point. So
if he doesn't take a position either way, what's your plan then? Will you vote against it?
I'll ask for his instruction. So I'm sure he'll give. The president's usually pretty good about expressing his opinion.
So, Navin, is there a co-equal branch of government
I think there's 4 million voters in Missouri who are like, who did I vote for exactly? Wasn't I supposed to vote for a senator that would have a voice? I mean, this is really something where you now have a branch of government, a party that is completely at the whim of one individual, even though they were elected to represent their constituents and their interests. And he's saying, listen, I don't have an opinion. Donald Trump tells me what to do, and that's what I do.
Rob, what do you make of that?
Well, for years now, Mitch McConnell hasn't been representing the interests of his constituents. They overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump, and he's voted against a couple of his nominees and his policy priorities. In terms of what the Senate and the House need to do, Gabe, they need to come to an agreement and get this budget reconciliation bill done quickly. The president is waiting on this money and these resources to carry out his agenda. And so I understand that there are narrow margins in both houses of Congress, but whether they go with one bill or two bills, they need to get together and make it happen.
What is clear, President Trump will definitely have quite the say. Thank you all so much for joining me here at the panel. Deepa, Navin, Rob, thank you so much.